All right, so we talked last time about the Pilgrims. By 1630, we see a much bigger exodus from England, and so most Puritans are going to cause what is known as the Great Migration. Now we're looking 1630 is when we're starting. 14,000 people between 1629 and 1643 will migrate out of England. So the situation in England is getting much worse. Continuing from last time where we talked about King Charles I, how he was much less understanding about the Puritans. So in 1629, a group of wealthy Puritans under a guy by the name of John Winthrop, they obtain a charter under their organization to come to the Americas. Winthrop will start, their charter becomes known as the Massachusetts Bay Company. And Winthrop was a newly risen English gentleman. So he wasn't one of those people of old money. He was pretty much new money. His father had a 500-acre estate known as Groton Manor, which was given to his family during Henry VIII's time on the throne during the Reformation. And he belonged to a class that became the dominant force in English society between 1540 and 1640. And keep in mind, in England, this is a very rocky time because you've got Queen Mary who comes up. So you've got this constant flip-flop between Protestantism and Catholicism. So Henry VIII very much goes toward the Anglican Church. When he dies, Queen Mary comes on the throne. She is still very Catholic. Um, Queen Mary doesn't make it long. When she dies, it flip-flops back to Queen Elizabeth, who is her half-sister, and Queen Elizabeth takes things right back to being Protestant. So this guy's family really does kind of pull through during some fairly rocky times. And his rank taught him very early in life how to command and manage large groups of people because estates during this time had, you would have like your peasant class who lived on and operated those large estates. And so he learns how to kind of demand that respect. Over the course of his life, Winthrop had 4 wives and 16 children. He studied law, had a court position, and he was in every sense of it, he was a full Puritan. He threw himself into biblical study from a very young age, and he believed that God had elected or chose him into salvation. So very much along the lines of a Calvinist, to where there is no free will, but that God chooses. Late in the 1620s, there was an economic slump which cost him his land in England. The combination of that and then Charles I's anti-Puritan policy cost him his position at court. And Winthrop, in turn, sold his estate and he joined the Massachusetts Bay Company. They relocated themselves to charter and everything else to New England and essentially established a self-governing colony 3,000 miles away from England. And there they established a republic where the Puritan men elected their government, and also their governor. They elected their deputy governor and their legislature. And in essence, I mean, you can really look at Massachusetts Bay and see the beginnings of a lot of what the framework for the United States ends up being formed on. It was what they intended to establish was a city on a hill. And it should have been a, hey, look at us. England, look how well this is going. You can also do this too. You can be fixed. And if done correctly, they thought that the Anglican Church would follow their path. So therefore, they really are in the United States for religious reasons, where we look at the Pilgrims and we can see religious and political reasons. We really do look at the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay, and we do see religious reasons for being there. They had 33,000 inhabitants in the region by 1660. 20,000 of those were in Massachusetts. The settlement had expanded to what is now Connecticut and Rhode Island, and they had a very stable population with relatively equal numbers of men and women. By 1650, we see a male-female ratio of 6 to 4 compared to 4 and 1 in the Chesapeakes. And if we look at it, why less women, it's always because of childbirth. Now, Jamestown and Chesapeake, we see that because they just didn't go there. It was a different type. But in these areas, we see it a lot because childbirth does kill a lot more women. I mean, we don't have the conveniences then that there are now. They did lack a plantation crop, and that would ordinarily bring indentured servants into play. By the end of this century, we see indentured servants in the Massachusetts Bay region making up less than 5% of the entire New England population. The environment, though, did require more labor, less payoff, but also allowed for longer and healthier lives than what we traditionally see in that Chesapeake region. So, life among the Puritans, each town, each settlement, land was granted to men who kind of banded together to found a town. And they would concentrate in these areas for defense, which allowed support of things like public school and a mutual supervision of morality among everyone, and allowed them to kind of sustain a well-attended church. By law, every town had to support a church. 1647, the law stated that every town with a population over 50 had to open a public school. And that's going to be very rare even in the United States. When we start looking at that foundation, public school is not something that's really offered for a long time. The town was also a local government, and town meetings were attended by males who owned property. And they were typically allowed to vote if they owned property. Family farms were about 100 to 50 acres, more or less, depending on social status. And I mean, each family has to be fairly large because they've got to clear the land, and they work on family labor rather than that indentured servitude that we see in the Chesapeake region. They really are living off of a family labor. They grew a medley of small crops such as wheat, rye, maize, potatoes, beans. They've got some small essential livestock, but overall they sought just to be independent. Family roles: men monopolized legal authority by law. Wives were they basically assumed the legal identity and names of their husbands. Now, a widow who had not remarried in this area could own property. And this is going to come up again, okay? Pay particular attention to this, that women who are widowed could own property, but no woman could vote or hold public office. So they end up a lot making their money off of commerce, and a merchant economy really grows there because of the location. By 1675, New England fisheries employed 440 boats, over 1,000 men. The men who were not on the boats, or who were on the boats, were not necessarily Puritans. However, the Puritans do benefit from this commerce that sets up here, because you have a lot of fisheries. You have they'll end up making a ton of money off of timber for all these ships that are being built, but it comes with a definite problem. So instead of being the city on a hill to help England reform, what ends up happening is they have a bunch of drunk men who come in because they're fishermen. And so then you have, because of all that, you have a lot of saloons and things like that that end up popping up. But they do become a region of shipbuilding. They exploit the dense forests of New Hampshire and Maine. From 1674 to 1714, New England shipbuilders built more than 1,200 ships. And this is a big deal. I mean, in England, can you really find that much timber anymore? So this really does boost their economy there in Massachusetts Bay. Winthrop and other Puritans hoped to, like I said a minute ago, hoped to establish that city on a hill. Instead, they have increasing numbers of immigrants. They have a lot of disagreements over the way things are run. They have a lot of debates and disruptions, and a couple things that happen here is religious dissent absolutely was not tolerated. Dissenters, so, we talked with the Pilgrims that this isn't necessarily freedom of religion, but a freedom to practice their own religion. It is so much here that dissenters were given either you can practice our religion, or you can go away from us and practice your own religion. So we will pick up the next video with that. We'll start with Roger Williams in Salem and look at how things kind of go there and how the dissension from him was handled. So.